We all expect to come home at the end of the day. Life usually follows a safe, predictable routine. But for a tragic few, they step outside and simply vanish into thin air. Today, we're covering 10 of the most chilling disappearances in American history. Also, I have a quick favor to ask. Due to a minor mistake in one of the previous videos, YouTube has temporarily lowered the channel's reach. You can really help me bounce back by subscribing to the channel, liking this video, and giving us hype points. Now, lock your doors and let's get into it. There's a 28-year-old mother. She kisses her two little boys goodnight on a snowy Sunday evening in suburban Utah. She goes to lie down on the couch because she's not feeling well. And that's it. That's the last time anyone outside that house ever sees her alive. The front door is locked. The driveway is buried in snow. From the street, it looks like the most normal, peaceful family home on the block. But inside that house, something has just happened. Something so dark that 16 years later, we still don't know where she is. This is the disappearance of Susan Powell. Let me set the scene for you. It's December 6th, 2009. West Valley City, Utah. Picture one of those quiet, cookie-cutter suburban streets where everyone has a two-car garage and a Christmas wreath on the door. The kind of neighborhood where you wave at your neighbors and complain about the snowplows. And on this particular Sunday, the weather is brutal. Temperatures started the afternoon around 47 degrees, but by evening, they've crashed below freezing. Snow is falling, the wind is biting. It's the kind of Utah winter night where you don't even want to walk out to the mailbox, let alone go anywhere. Now, inside one of these perfectly ordinary houses lives the Powell family. Susan, 28, works at Wells Fargo Investments. She's a devoted mom to two little boys, Charlie, who's 4, and Braden, who's just 2. By every external measure, she's living the American suburban dream. But here's the thing. Susan was terrified. She was terrified of her own husband, Josh. Now, this isn't me speculating after the fact. This is documented. Susan had been watching her marriage fall apart for years. Josh was controlling, financially reckless, volatile. He'd put the family into a $200,000 bankruptcy in 2007. She'd been secretly recording him, documenting property damage he caused around the house, building a record. And then, in 2008, she did something most women in unhappy marriages never do. She wrote a secret handwritten will. She locked it away in a safety deposit box, and in that will, she wrote a line that gives me chills every single time I read it. She wrote that if she died, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one. Think about that. This is a 28-year-old mother of 2 young boys. She's not writing a poem. She's not journaling. She's writing a legal document. She is, in effect, leaving a message for police from beyond the grave. She knew, on some level she knew this was coming. So fast forward to that Sunday. December 6th, 2009. The afternoon is relatively normal. A neighbor, Giovanna Owings, comes over. Josh makes pancakes and eggs for everyone for a late lunch. They chat, they eat. And then around late afternoon, Susan tells the neighbors she feels strangely tired, unusually tired. She lies down to take a nap. Giovanna leaves. The neighbor goes home. And that's the last time anyone outside that family ever sees Susan Powell alive. Now, the next morning, Monday, December 7th, things start to fall apart. The daycare provider, Debbie Caldwell, is waiting for the Powell boys to be dropped off. They never show up. At first, she figures it's the snowstorm. Roads are bad. Maybe they slept in. But then 7 a.m. rolls around and Susan doesn't show up for her shift at Wells Fargo. Susan was the reliable one. She didn't miss work. People start making calls. Susan's emergency contacts can't reach her. Eventually, Josh's own sister and mother call 911 because they're getting worried. Police arrive at the house, they get no answer. They're so concerned about a possible carbon monoxide leak inside that they actually break a window to get in. And what they find is a ghost house. The lights are off. Susan's purse is sitting there, her wallet, her keys, her cell phone, all the things a woman would never leave behind if she'd voluntarily walked out the door. The kids are gone. Josh is gone. Susan is gone. The minivan is gone. But every single item that would prove Susan left of her own free will is sitting in that house, untouched. And then there's the couch. In the living room, police find two box fans running on high, pointed directly at a wet spot on the sofa. The fans have been arranged to dry it out as quickly as possible. The cushions are damp, something has been scrubbed. And later, forensic analysis will find traces of Susan's blood on the floor nearby. Now hold on a second. Let's look at that again. It is the dead of winter in Utah. It is freezing inside any house that isn't actively heated. Why would anyone need fans running on high to dry out a couch? You'd just let it air dry overnight. The fans aren't there for normal cleaning. The fans are there because someone needed that cushion dry, and they needed it dry fast. Why? That question is still hanging in the air when, hours after police entered the house, Josh Powell casually pulls up in his minivan with his two little boys in the back, and he acts shocked that his wife is missing, shocked that police are at his house. And when they ask him where he's been for the last 24 hours, he tells them with a straight face that he took the boys camping in December in Utah on a work night. Now, this is where it gets strange. And by strange, I mean the alibi falls apart the second you actually think about it for 10 seconds. Josh claims that at 12:30 in the morning, in sub-freezing temperatures during an active snowstorm, he decided to wake up his 2-year-old and his 4-year-old, bundle them into the minivan, and drive them out to the Pony Express Trail near Simpson Springs. Have you ever seen the Pony Express Trail? It's a vast, pitch-black frozen stretch of desert, washboard dirt roads, the kind of place where you need a 4-wheel drive even when the weather is good. There are no cabins, there are no rest stops, there is nothing. It is the middle of absolute nowhere. And Josh's explanation for going there? He wanted to test his new generator. Let me just say that out loud one more time. A father wakes his toddlers up at midnight in a blizzard, drives them hours into the freezing desert to test a generator, and he has to be at work in the morning. But here's the thing. Who goes camping at midnight on a Sunday when they have work Monday morning? Who takes a 2-year-old into sub-freezing temperatures in the open desert? Who decides this is a good idea while their wife is asleep on the couch at home? None of it makes sense. Not one piece of it. And then there's the phone. Josh's cell phone activity goes completely dark from 12:14 p.m. on Sunday until 3:02 p.m. on Monday. More than 24 hours of silence from a man whose wife is supposedly just at home napping. People don't accidentally turn off their phones for that long. People who don't want to be tracked turn off their phones for that long. Then there are the kids. Years later, little Charlie, the 4-year-old, would tell detectives something that absolutely broke the case wide open in everyone's mind. He said his mommy did go camping with them that night, but she stayed in the trunk, and she never came back. A 4-year-old doesn't make that up. A 4-year-old doesn't have the imagination to fabricate a detail that specific and that disturbing. He told the truth. He told the truth in the only way a 4-year-old can. So let's pull this all together. Susan, a woman who openly feared for her life, who left a literal note saying, "This may not look like an accident, but it is," vanishes from her own couch on a snowy Sunday. Her purse stays, her keys stay, her phone stays, her children stay, at least initially. Her blood is on the floor. The couch is wet and being aggressively dried. Her husband, who has been completely silent on his phone for over a day, returns hours later, claiming he went camping in a blizzard at midnight with 2 toddlers to test a generator hours before his shift starts. And his 4-year-old son matter-of-factly tells police his mom rode in the trunk. What more do you need? The police knew. They knew almost immediately. Detective Ellis Maxwell, who led the case, would say later that he was certain Josh Powell murdered his wife. Investigators went out to that frozen desert. They searched mine shafts. They flew helicopters with thermal imaging. They dug. They sifted. They scoured thousands of square miles of that wasteland. And they found nothing. Susan was gone, buried somewhere out in that pitch-black expanse, swallowed by the snow and the silence. But the story doesn't end there. And honestly, this is the part that still haunts me the most. For more than 2 years, Josh fought the police. His family even put up a website claiming Susan had simply run off with another man. As if a woman who recorded videos of her own house, who hid a will warning about her own murder, who loved her boys more than anything, just walked into a Utah blizzard and disappeared into the arms of a stranger. It was insulting, it was absurd, and it didn't fool anyone. By 2012, Josh had lost custody of the boys. They'd been placed with Susan's parents. He was only allowed supervised visits. And on February 5th, 2012, during one of those supervised visits at his rental home in Graham, Washington, Josh Powell did something so monstrous that there is no logic, no analysis, no theory that can hold it. He locked the social worker out. He took his two little boys, Charlie and Braden, into the house. And he intentionally set a fire that claimed all three of their lives. That is who Josh Powell was. That is what he was capable of. And that, more than anything else, told us everything we needed to know about what happened on that snowy December night in 2009. Susan Powell has never been found. Her body is still out there somewhere, in the cold dark of the Utah desert. The case is officially closed. Police definitively concluded that Josh murdered her and that his brother Michael, who later also died by suicide, helped him hide her body. She went to sleep on a snowy Sunday afternoon in Utah, on her own couch, in her own home, and she never woke up. That's it. That's the whole story. A woman who knew exactly what was coming, who tried to warn us, who left a trail of evidence for the police to follow, vanished into the snow because the one person who should have protected her was the one she needed protection from. And we can talk about timelines and forensics and cell phone records all night long. But at the end of it all, the truest, most chilling fact of this case is the one Susan herself wrote down before any of it happened. If I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one. She knew. A 5-year-old girl, 40 pounds, 3 feet tall, bright blue eyes, long blonde hair that her family had recently shaved short. She's standing in her own front yard on a warm summer afternoon, planting flowers in pots with her mom and her grandma. When they're done, she walks inside her own house. She heads down to her own basement to play with her own toys. Her mother is upstairs. Her grandmother is on the property. Her 3 older brothers are in the house. The family dogs are around. The driveway is long, steep, and isolated, and in the span of about 5 minutes, this barefoot child evaporates. Tracking dogs follow her scent down the driveway. The scent ends at the road, and then nothing. No footprints, no clothing, no trace. This is the disappearance of Summer Wells. Let me set the scene for you. Rogersville, Tennessee. The evening of June 15th, 2021. Now, if you've never been to East Tennessee, you need to understand the geography here, because the geography is the heart of this case. Beech Creek is a tiny community in Hawkins County. It is rural in a way that suburban America has trouble imagining. We're talking about Appalachian hill country, steep wooded mountains, narrow winding roads, houses tucked into hollers and ridges, sometimes a quarter mile from the nearest neighbor, the kind of place where you don't see a stranger for days. The Wells family lived on Ben Hill Road. The property sits on a steep hill. To get to it, you have to drive up a long, prominent driveway that's visible from the road. Surrounding the house in every direction is dense, savage Appalachian wilderness, thorny brush, briars, steep drops, hidden ravines, the kind of brush so thick that even adult search and rescue volunteers in long pants and boots get cut up just trying to walk through it. The 3,000 acres around the property are not a friendly forest. They are a hostile, claustrophobic, choking maze of green that swallows light and sound. The afternoon of June 15th was warm, sunny, a little muggy, high in the low 70s, pleasant, the kind of pretty late spring day in Tennessee where you'd want to be outside. And the Wells family was doing exactly that. In the middle of all of this is our victim, Summer Moon Utah Wells, 5 years old, 3 feet tall, 40 pounds, tiny, vibrant, bright blue eyes. Curiously, her long blonde hair had been recently cut very, very short, almost shaved. The family says it was a haircut, and on this particular afternoon, she was barefoot. Just a pink shirt, gray shorts, no shoes. She loved being outside. She loved planting flowers with her mom and her grandma. She was a totally normal, joyful, slightly chaotic 5-year-old. Let me walk you through the afternoon, because this is the part of the case that nobody can quite agree on, and the gaps in the official timeline are honestly part of what's kept this mystery unsolvable. The day started normal. Summer went with her mother, Candace Bly, her grandmother, and one of her brothers down to a local swimming hole. Then they ran a series of errands: a drugstore, a vape shop, a grocery store, a local watering hole. They returned to the Ben Hill Road property in the late afternoon. By around 5:30 p.m., Summer is in the front yard. Her mom and her grandma are out there with her. They're planting flowers in some pots. It's a sweet, mundane, totally innocent scene. The kind of moment you only remember later because it's the last one. Summer says she's done planting. She wants to go inside and play with her toys in the basement. Now, the basement at the Wells house is not your typical finished basement. It's described as a separate area you have to climb down to, stairs or a ladder, down to a mattress on the floor. It's the kind of unfinished, slightly creepy basement that a lot of older rural properties have. And critically, that basement has an exterior door, a door that leads out to the side of the house, into the yard, and from there, down toward the driveway and the road. Summer goes inside. She heads down to that basement. Her 3 older brothers are in the house, upstairs. Her mother stays outside finishing up. Her grandma is around too. Sometime in the next few minutes, Candace calls down or sends someone to check on Summer. She isn't there. The basement is empty. Her toys are there. Her mattress is there. But the little girl who walked down those stairs 5 minutes ago is gone. The exterior basement door is unlocked. The yard is empty. Summer is not in the house. Summer is not in the yard. Summer is not on the driveway. Panic sets in. Candace alerts Don, the father. The family starts screaming her name, searching the property. They call 911 at 6:30 p.m. Within an hour, that quiet hill becomes the center of one of the largest search operations in East Tennessee history. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation issues an endangered child alert. By the next morning, it's been upgraded to a statewide Amber Alert. They bring in everything: helicopters with thermal imaging, drones, dive teams for the local creeks, volunteer search and rescue, a TV's cadaver dogs, live scent tracking dogs. They search 3,000 acres of brutal Appalachian terrain. They search for days, weeks, months, and they find absolutely nothing. Not a footprint, not a piece of pink shirt fabric, not a single barefoot print in the soft Tennessee dirt, not a strand of hair caught on a thorn. Nothing. Now hold on. Let's actually think about what we're looking at, because the physical evidence in this case is genuinely strange. Let's start with the scent dogs, because this is the detail that, in my opinion, breaks the entire "she wandered off into the woods" theory. The trained K9 units showed up. They were given Summer's scent, and they did pick up a trail. They followed it, from the house, down the long, steep gravel driveway, all the way to the end of the driveway, where it meets the rural road. And then the scent just ended. Now, in forensic tracking, this is huge. Scent dogs don't randomly lose a trail on dry pavement, especially in mild weather. When a scent trail terminates at a roadway, especially right at the edge of the road, it means one of two things. Either the person stopped right there and disappeared into thin air, or, far more likely, the person was lifted off their own feet and put into a vehicle. The scent then travels with the vehicle, not with the road. So the trail ends. So if we trust the dogs, and there's no reason not to, Summer didn't wander into the wilderness. Summer left the property, in a vehicle, with somebody. But this is where it gets strange. Because the second theory, the stranger abduction theory, has its own enormous logic gap. Let's actually picture this. The Wells property is at the top of a long, steep, isolated driveway in rural Hawkins County. To grab Summer in the window we're talking about, a stranger would have had to drive up that driveway in broad daylight on a Tuesday afternoon, while 2 adults are working in the front yard. Or, alternatively, they would have had to park somewhere down on Ben Hill Road and walk up the driveway, again in broad daylight, while 2 adults are right there. Enter the property, get inside the basement, either talk a 5-year-old into following them or physically take her. and then get her back down that driveway and into a vehicle without making a single sound and without being seen by Candace, her grandmother, or any of the 3 brothers in the house. How does that happen? In the span of about 5 minutes? In a community where strangers stick out like a sore thumb? Where the driveway is fully visible from the front yard where the adults were planting flowers? There were reports later of an unidentified red pickup truck seen in the area around that time. The father, Donald Wells, even publicly penned a letter to the alleged kidnappers, openly endorsing this theory. But the truck has never been definitively traced. No tag, no driver, no corroborating witnesses. So the stranger theory has real problems too. And then there's the wandering theory, which the search team spent the most time on. Some people initially thought, well, maybe Summer just walked out the basement door and toddled off into the woods. Got lost. Couldn't find her way back. It's a horrible thought, but a familiar one for these rural cases. But let's look at the terrain. Let's look at her. She was barefoot. She was 3 feet tall. She was wearing a pink shirt and gray shorts. The brush surrounding the Wells property is choked with thorns and briars. A barefoot 5-year-old does not sprint silently into that. She'd get cut up. Her clothing would snag. She'd cry out. She'd leave a clear trail. And even if she somehow vanished into a ravine or fell into a hidden hole, after thousands of acres searched by helicopters, drones, cadaver dogs, and ground teams, after years of follow-up searches, the law of probability says they should have found something. Some piece of evidence, some scrap of clothing, some bone, some scrap of pink fabric caught on a thorn. They found nothing. And then there's the third darkest theory, the one that the internet has spent thousands of hours on, the one that suggests something happened in or near that house, that a fatal accident or worse occurred at the hands of an adult on the property, that the basement story, the unlocked door, the morning timeline were all a setup, that Summer never actually walked down to that basement at all. Now, I want to be careful here, because there's never been a single piece of physical evidence linking Summer's parents to a crime. They were investigated. They reportedly passed initial polygraphs. They've maintained their innocence publicly. And it is genuinely possible, even probable, that they are simply grieving parents stuck in an unsolvable nightmare. But here's what is true. Just 2 months before Summer vanished, Donald Wells had been arrested for possession of a handgun while intoxicated. About 4 months after she vanished, he was arrested again for a DUI probation violation. There was a documented history of domestic friction in that household. And this is the part that really fueled the public's suspicion. About a month after Summer's disappearance, the Tennessee Department of Children's Services abruptly removed her 3 older brothers from the home. The parents eventually signed over their parental rights to those boys entirely. That doesn't happen lightly. That happens when child welfare investigators see enough that they need to act fast. And there's one more chilling detail. Candace, Summer's mother, has an aunt named Rose Marie Bly, who herself vanished without a trace 12 years earlier in Wisconsin. A second unsolved disappearance in the same family line. Probably just a tragic, statistical coincidence, but it sits in the file like a stain you can't quite scrub out. So now stand back and look at the whole thing. The dogs say she left in a vehicle. The terrain says she didn't wander off. The family says a stranger took her. The Department of Children's Services took her siblings. The investigators have publicly stayed neutral. And nobody, after 4 years, has been able to assemble these pieces into a coherent picture that doesn't have a gaping hole in it. The media circus that followed was massive. True crime. YouTubers descended on Beach Creek. Online sleuths analyzed every word the parents said. They generated thousands of tips, most of them based on internet rumors. Investigators have publicly stated that the flood of social media speculation actively hindered the case, forcing them to chase ghosts instead of leads. And in the middle of all of it, Summer is still missing. There has been no body, no confirmed sighting, no ransom call, no deathbed confession, no closure of any kind. 4 years on, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has the case open, cold but open. The reward is still active. Somewhere out there, the answer exists. Maybe in that thick Appalachian brush, Maybe in the bed of a red pickup truck that drove off down Ben Hill Road one Tuesday in June. Maybe inside a person who's been quiet for 4 years and may stay quiet forever. She was 3 feet tall. She was barefoot. She was 40 pounds of bright blonde, blue-eyed, flower-planting joy. She walked down to her own basement on a warm summer afternoon, in her own home, with her own family in the building, to play with her own toys. And in 5 minutes, she stopped existing in the physical world. The scent ended at the road, and the road has never given Summer Wells back. Picture this. It's 4 in the morning in a college dorm. The building is quiet. The fluorescent hallway lights are humming. A 19-year-old freshman finishes a video game. He stands up from his desk, walks down the hallway, and high-fives his friend a few doors down. Nice game. Good night. Then he turns around and walks back toward his own room. His friend watches him go. That walk down the hallway, maybe 50 feet of brightly lit carpeted dormitory corridor, is the last time anyone on planet Earth ever sees Michael Negrete. He never makes it back to his room. He leaves behind his keys, his wallet, his clothes, his trumpet, and, most impossibly, his shoes. He vanishes from a locked, secure freshman dormitory full of hundreds of sleeping students on one of the most populated university campuses in America, and 26 years later, not a single trace of him has ever been found. This is the disappearance of Michael Negrete. Let me set the scene for you. UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles, December 10th, 1999. Now, picture the geography here, because the geography is critical. UCLA is enormous. It's a city within a city, hundreds of acres in the Westwood neighborhood of Los Angeles, just north of Sunset Boulevard. Tens of thousands of students, massive lecture halls, libraries, student plazas, dining commons. And on the residential side, you have these huge dormitories. Towering buildings stacked floor after floor with freshmen and sophomores trying to figure out who they're going to be for the rest of their lives. One of those buildings is Dykstra Hall, 10 stories, hundreds of rooms, a residence hall that runs like a small city itself, keycard access at the front door, RAs on every floor, front desk attendants checking IDs at night, long, brightly lit hallways with carpet that absorbs sound. The kind of place where you swipe in, you say hi to the desk worker, you take the elevator up, and you exist inside a closed ecosystem of other 18 and 19-year-olds. You're never alone. There's always somebody awake. There's always somebody around. That's the entire point of a freshman dorm. It's a safety bubble. The night of December 9th, going into December 10th, was the last few days before winter break. Finals were ending. Students were packing up. The campus was emptying out. The vibe was that strange, sleepy, slightly euphoric end-of-quarter energy. Outside, the December LA night was cool. Not freezing, but cold enough that you'd put on shoes before going anywhere. The exterior of campus was actually torn up at this point too, because UCLA had a bunch of huge construction projects going on. Open pits, cranes, fencing, detours. And in the middle of all of this is our victim, Michael William Negrete. 18 years old, a bright, popular, musically gifted freshman. He'd come to UCLA on a music scholarship. He played the trumpet. He was actually in a campus band called Island Fever, where he'd performed in a concert just hours before he vanished. He was 5'8", well-liked, well-adjusted by every external measure. No history of running away, no documented mental illness, no enemies. He'd just emailed his mother earlier that evening. He had concrete plans for the morning. He was, by every available metric, a kid with a bright future who absolutely intended to wake up the next day. Let me walk you through that night, because the timeline is incredibly tight, almost claustrophobically tight, and it's been picked apart by investigators for over 2 decades. The evening of December 9th, Michael performs the concert with his band. He's in a good mood. Afterwards, he heads back to the dorm. There's a floor party going on in Dykstra Hall. Pretty typical. 15 to 20 students hanging out, some beer, some music. Michael is part of the scene for a while. Then, around midnight, he goes back to his own room. His roommate is already asleep in the bottom bunk. Michael, who's a night owl, logs onto his computer. And for the next 4 hours, between midnight and 4 a.m., Michael Negrete plays a networked video game against a friend who lives in another room on the exact same floor. They're in the same building. They could literally yell at each other through the walls. But they're playing online, communicating through the game. At exactly 4 a.m., the match ends. Michael logs off. He stands up. He walks out of his room, down the brightly lit hallway to his friend's door. Knocks, goes in. They chat for a minute. Congratulations on a good game. Good night, man. See you tomorrow. Michael steps back out into the hallway. The friend watches him walk away, watches his back recede down the corridor toward his own room. That is the last verified sighting of Michael Negrete. Cut to 9 a.m. the next morning. Michael's roommate wakes up. He looks around. Michael isn't there. Initially, no big deal. He must have gone to class early or to breakfast. But something doesn't sit right. Because as the roommate gets up and looks around the room, he starts noticing what's still there. Michael's wallet, sitting on the desk. Michael's keys right next to it. Michael's clothes, folded. Michael's trumpet, untouched. Michael's school stuff, books, notebooks, everything. And in the spot near the door where Michael's shoes always sat, those shoes are still there. That's when the panic sets in. Because a college student doesn't leave for breakfast without his keys, he doesn't leave for class without his wallet, and he absolutely doesn't leave the dorm in December without his shoes. The roommate alerts the RA. The RA alerts campus housing. Campus housing calls UCLA police, and what unfolds over the next few days becomes one of the most thorough searches in the history of the UCLA campus. They search every room in Dykstra Hall, every single one of those hundreds of rooms. They search the laundry rooms, the mechanical closets, the basement storage areas. They literally rappel down the building's garbage chutes to see if there's a body inside. They send out 900 questionnaires to students who lived in the building. The LAPD eventually classifies the case as a homicide and brings in their own resources. They search the campus, every construction site, every open pit where someone could fall in and be buried under concrete, every shed, every dumpster, every dorm, every administrative building. They search the surrounding Westwood neighborhood. They search the canyons, the reservoirs, the on-ramp embankments along Sunset. And then they bring in the bloodhounds. This is where the case gets weird because the dogs do pick up a scent. They start at Dykstra Hall. They follow Michael's scent out of the building, across the campus plaza, all the way to a bus stop at the intersection of Sunset and Bellagio, about a mile from the dorm. And then the scent vanishes. Now hold on. Let's actually think about this. The bloodhounds tracked a 19-year-old scent for a full mile across the UCLA campus in the December darkness to a bus stop on Sunset Boulevard. Police would later try to dismiss this lead. They said the dogs were probably confused by the urban traffic, probably an unreliable trail. But bloodhounds don't just casually fabricate a mile-long route, they follow what they smell. And what they smelled went exactly there. Now, this is where it gets strange. Because if Michael walked that mile, he did it without his shoes. Let me say that again, because I want this to sink in. He walked a full mile across a concrete campus in 40-degree December air to a public bus stop on a major Los Angeles street in his socks. Or barefoot. How does that happen? What is the scenario where a sober, rational, intelligent college student decides, you know what? I'm going to take a midnight walk across campus to a bus stop, but I'm going to leave my shoes behind. There isn't one. There is no rational scenario. Which means one of two things has to be true. Either Michael wasn't sober, or Michael wasn't fully in control of his own choices. Years later, Michael's brother Steve gave an interview that added some critical context. He said that Michael had recently started exploring the underground rave and electronic music scene in Los Angeles. He said Michael had recently been experimenting with illicit party substances. That detail had never come out at the time. It changes the picture significantly. Because somebody on ecstasy, somebody whose neurochemistry has been altered, might absolutely walk out into the cold without thinking about shoes. Might wander toward a friend, toward a perceived destination, toward something they thought was there. But MDMA alone doesn't explain a clean disappearance. People on ecstasy don't usually vanish without a trace. They get found wandering on a sidewalk. They get picked up by campus police. They show up at an emergency room. Something, anything. And then there's the bus stop. Let's actually picture this. If Michael got on a city bus at 4 in the morning, in his socks, no wallet, no money for a fare, a bus driver is going to remember that. There would be a record, there would be a witness, there was none. So Michael didn't get on a bus, which means somebody picked him up in a car at that bus stop at 4:30 in the morning after he walked a mile from his dorm in his socks. Who picks up a 19-year-old in their socks at a bus stop at 4:30 a.m. on Sunset Boulevard? Friend, drug contact, stranger, predator? You can fill in that blank in a lot of different ways, and every single one of them is bad. And here's where it gets really dark. Around the same time Michael vanished, an unverified witness reported seeing an unidentified man hovering suspiciously around the exterior of Dexter Hall. A heavy-set Caucasian man, around 35 years old. Way too old to be a freshman. Way too old to be visiting a freshman. He didn't fit in the dorm environment at all. Police generated a composite sketch. They publicly appealed for this man to come forward and clear his name. He never did. So you've got a 35-year-old stranger lurking outside a locked freshman dorm at the exact moment a 19-year-old vanishes from inside that dorm without his shoes. How did that man get into the building if he did? How did he know Michael? Was there a connection? Or was he just standing there at the most coincidentally awful possible moment in the universe? We don't know. We've never known. And let's talk about one more theory, because it haunts every analysis of this case: the construction sites. UCLA had multiple massive construction projects active in December 1999. Open pits, wet concrete being poured. Some people have wondered over the years whether Michael, disoriented or intoxicated, wandered onto a construction site, fell into a pit, and was accidentally entombed when the workers showed up in the morning and poured concrete over him. Search teams investigated every single one of those sites. They specifically asked construction crews. They examined poured concrete. They found nothing. No anomalies, no disturbances. The construction theory was as thoroughly explored as it could be. It doesn't seem to be the answer. So what are we left with? A young man with a trumpet and a music scholarship, no history of mental health issues, no enemies, no obvious reason to vanish, walks out of his locked dormitory at some point after 4 a.m. in his socks, leaving behind every single possession he has in the world. He's tracked by dogs to a bus stop a mile away. The trail ends. A stranger in his 30s was seen prowling the dorm at the same hour. And Michael Negrete, 19 years old, with his entire life ahead of him, never appears on a security camera, never makes a phone call, never uses a credit card, never withdraws cash, never contacts his family. He's just gone, wiped from existence, as cleanly as if he never existed at all. His family hired private investigators. They offered a $100,000 reward. His mother spent years actively searching. They even appeared on the Montel Williams show, where the so-called psychic Sylvia Brown told them, with full confidence, geographic locations that turned out to be completely, demonstrably wrong. Just one more cruel detour in a case full of dead ends. The LAPD's official designation of the case is homicide. They don't believe Michael walked off into the void on his own. They believe somebody intervened. Somebody was waiting. Somebody knew. And they've been waiting for the break that never comes. 26 years later, Mary Negrete is still his mother. She has gotten old waiting for an answer her son's killer or kidnapper has never been forced to give. And Michael Negrete, the kid who played trumpet, the kid who was just trying to make it through finals week before winter break, is still 19 years old in every photograph that exists of him. He logged off his computer at 4 a.m. He stepped out into the hallway to congratulate his friend. And the game was over forever. "10 minutes. That's it. That's the entire window we're talking about." A mother parks her car at a public park on a sunny Monday afternoon. Her 5-year-old daughter and her 3-year-old son run off to play on the swings just 30 yards away. The mother sits in the car, scratching a lottery ticket, helping a young relative with homework. 10 minutes pass. She gets out to check on the kids, and when she walks up to the playground, she finds her 3-year-old son standing there alone, crying, his ice cream melting on the ground next to him. His sister is gone. And in the 7 years since that afternoon, nobody, no helicopter, no dive team, no cadaver dog, no Amber Alert, no FBI investigation has ever been able to find a single trace of her. This is the disappearance of Dulce Maria Alaves. Let me set the scene for you. Bridgeton City Park, Southern New Jersey, September 16th, 2019. Now, picture this in your head, late summer, that golden, slightly hazy afternoon light that makes everything look like a memory. The temperature is warm, but not hot. School has just started back up, and Bridgeton City Park is exactly the kind of place every American suburb has. Sprawling, over 1,000 acres, walking trails, wooded edges, open fields, and right in the middle, a typical, slightly worn public playground. Swings, a slide, some climbing equipment, concrete pathways, the kind of place where you'd take your kids on a random weekday afternoon and not think twice about it. The vibe that afternoon was pure, mundane normalcy. Families showing up after school, kids running around, the faint creak of swing chains, the distant sound of traffic on the nearby roads. The whole scene was the visual definition of nothing is going to happen here today. And that's the thing about this case. That's the part that has to sit with you for a second. This wasn't a remote forest. This wasn't a back alley. This wasn't a deserted parking lot at 2 in the morning. This was a public park on a Monday afternoon in September. Other families were there. Other kids were playing. Cars were driving by. The sun was up. And in the middle of all of that, a 5-year-old girl was abducted in less than 10 minutes. Let me tell you about Dulce. Dulce Maria Alaves was 5 years old. She had dark hair. She was small, about 3'5". She was wearing a bright yellow shirt that afternoon with black and white checkered pants that had little floral designs on them and white sandals. She was the kind of kid you'd remember. Family videos released later show her singing "Let It Go" from Frozen at the top of her lungs, grabbing cell phones to take selfies, dancing around the living room. She was sparkly. She was talkative. She was a regular, joyful 5-year-old kindergartner. She had no concept of danger. She was completely focused on the swings and her melting ice cream. She had absolutely no situational awareness that anything bad could ever happen to her. Because she was 5. Because she shouldn't have had to. Okay, let's walk through the afternoon. Because the timeline of this case is so tight, so compressed, that you really have to feel every minute of it. Just before 4 p.m., Dulce's mother, Noema Alaves Perez, who's 19 years old at this point, stops at a local convenience store. She's got Dulce with her. She's got Dulce's 3-year-old brother, Manuel. And she's got an 8-year-old female relative riding along. Surveillance video captures Noema buying ice cream for all 3 of the kids. Just a normal stop. Just a normal afternoon treat. They drive to Bridgeton City Park. Noema parks her car near the playground area, and here's the critical detail. The car is about 30 yards from the playground. Now, 30 yards isn't huge. That's roughly the length of 3 school buses parked end to end. But between Noema's parked car and the playground, there's a small grassy hill. A bit of a topographical bump. And that hill's just tall enough that, from where she was sitting in the driver's seat, her direct line of sight to the play equipment is blocked. Dulce and her little brother climb out of the car. They run off toward the playground, ice cream in hand. The 8-year-old stays behind in the car with Noema. And Noema does what a lot of tired moms do on a Monday afternoon. She pulls out a scratch-off lottery ticket. She starts helping the 8-year-old with her homework. She's right there. Her kids are right there. Everything is fine. 10 minutes pass. Maybe 20, depending on which version of the timeline you trust. The 8-year-old looks up and says something like, "We haven't heard the kids in a while." And in that exact moment, Manuel, the 3-year-old, comes running back to the car, alone, crying hysterically, pointing. Noema gets out of the car. She runs to the playground, and Dulce isn't there. The ice cream cone that Manuel was holding is on the ground, dropped or thrown. The yellow shirt, the checkered pants, the white sandals, the bright, sparkly 5-year-old girl. Gone. What follows is absolute hell. Noema searches the immediate area. She runs behind the park buildings. She checks the edges of the woods. She's screaming Dulce's name. She finally calls 911 at 5 p.m., less than an hour after they arrived, and within hours, the response is massive. Bridgeton Police, New Jersey State Police, the FBI, helicopters in the air, dive teams in the local waterways, tracking dogs sweeping the 1,000-acre park. By the next night, a statewide Amber Alert is issued with a very specific suspect description. And they find nothing. Not a footprint, not a sandal, not a fiber, not a single trace of Dulcie. Now hold on. Let's actually think about what we're looking at, because the logistics of this abduction are honestly terrifying. Let's talk about the time window. 10 minutes, that is, give or take, the entire span of the crime. Now, if this was a targeted kidnapping, somebody who had been watching the family, somebody who knew where they'd be that afternoon, how did they know Noema was going to sit in the car? How did they know she would be distracted by a lottery ticket and a homework problem for exactly that long? You can't plan for that. You can't predict a teenage mom's level of distraction down to the minute, so if it wasn't targeted, it had to be opportunistic. But here's the thing, what are the actual odds of an opportunistic predator just happening to be at that exact playground on that exact Monday afternoon, in that exact 10-minute window when two small, unsupervised children showed up? That requires a predator who was hunting at a public playground in broad daylight. Patient. Ready. Just waiting for the exact circumstances to fall into place. Both versions are deeply uncomfortable to think about, but the case demands one of them be true. Now let's talk about the silence, because this is the part of the case that absolutely doesn't make sense to me. A 5-year-old girl is not going to silently walk off with a stranger. That's not how 5-year-olds work. Even a friendly, talkative kid like Dulcie, the moment a strange man tries to lead her away from her brother, there's going to be confusion, there's going to be hesitation, there's going to be a cry, there's going to be, at the absolute minimum, the loud, panicked no of a kindergartner who knows she's not supposed to go with strangers. And she wasn't alone. Her 3-year-old brother was right there. So even if she didn't scream, Manuel would have. A 3-year-old watching his sister get taken would have lost his mind. There would have been a scene. People in the park would have looked over. Somebody, anybody, would have noticed something. But here's what we have. The brother was found crying. He was pointing toward an area behind one of the park buildings. He was clearly distressed, but he was 3 years old. He didn't have the words. He couldn't articulate what he'd just seen. He couldn't say, "A man took her." He couldn't say, "The red van." He could only cry and point. The only direct witness to the abduction of Dulcie Maria Alaves was a toddler whose brain wasn't yet developed enough to testify. According to that initial frantic 911 call, bystanders in the park told Noema that they saw 2 males throw Manuel's ice cream on the ground before running off with Dulcie. 2 men. That's the original report. 2 of them, which means this wasn't a single creep snatching an opportunity. This was potentially a coordinated effort, and then, over the following 24 hours, a different witness sighting emerged, a specific one, detailed enough to issue the Amber Alert, a light-skinned, possibly Hispanic male, 5'6" to 5'8", thin build, visible acne on his face, orange sneakers, red pants, black shirt. And critically, the witness said this man led Dulcie away from the playground and into the back seat of a red van with a sliding door and tinted windows. Now, this is where it gets strange. Let's actually think about that red van. Bridgeton City Park sits in the middle of a populated area. It's surrounded by roads. There are houses nearby. There are businesses nearby. This is 2019, not 1989. There are doorbell cameras on people's porches. There are traffic cameras at intersections. There are security cameras on every gas station and convenience store. We live in a world that is, for better or worse, drowning in surveillance footage, and somehow, a red van with tinted windows, distinctive enough that a witness could describe its features, drove away from a major public park in the middle of a Monday afternoon with a kidnapped child in the back and evaded every single camera. No license plate, no grainy still frame, no traffic light hit, no gas station footage, no doorbell video of it driving past a neighborhood. How? How does that happen in 2019? Unless the van was a dead-end lead, unless the witness was mistaken, or unless whoever was driving knew exactly which roads to take, which routes to avoid, which back ways to slip out of Bridgeton without ever crossing a camera's line of sight, which would suggest local knowledge, which would push us back uncomfortably toward the theory that this wasn't a random stranger at all. And of course, this is the moment where any abduction case in America turns toxic, because public attention shifted immediately onto Noema, the teenage mother, the lottery ticket, the fact that she didn't scream and sob enough on camera during early interviews to satisfy strangers on the internet. People combed through her social media. They speculated about her relationship status. They invented conspiracies about her selling her own daughter. None of it was based on evidence. All of it was based on the public's bottomless appetite for blaming mothers when something terrible happens to a child. Investigators have publicly defended Noema and stated they don't believe she had any involvement. Police also explored in the early days whether Dulcie's biological father, who lives in Mexico, might have hired someone to retrieve her due to a custody dispute. The FBI made contact with him and seemingly cleared him as a suspect. So that theory faded too. What we're left with is a 5-year-old girl who walked 30 yards from her mother's car on a sunny Monday afternoon, played on a swing for less than 10 minutes, and disappeared from a public American park in broad daylight on camera-saturated streets without a single piece of physical evidence ever surfacing. The reward fund has grown over the years. There have been age progression photos. There have been tips by the thousands. There have been searches in lakes and rivers and dumpsters and abandoned buildings. Nothing. Not a sandal, not a strand of her dark hair, not a single confirmed sighting. Somewhere out there, Dulce Maria Alaves, if she's still alive, would now be 11 years old. She would be in middle school. She would still know the words to Let It Go. She would, hopefully, still be sparkly and talkative and joyful. But for her mother, for her family, for the community of Bridgeton, the afternoon of September 16th, 2019 is frozen in place. A bright yellow shirt, checkered pants, white sandals, a melted ice cream cone, a 3-year-old boy crying alone on a playground. 10 minutes. That's all it took for a sunny afternoon in the park to swallow a little girl whole. And 7 years later, the park still hasn't given her back. Two blocks. That's it. That's the entire distance we're talking about. 2 short blocks on a Manhattan sidewalk on a busy Friday morning in May. A 6-year-old boy in a pilot's cap holding a dollar bill in his hand walks down the steps of his family's loft, takes a left, and is supposed to walk just 2 blocks south to his school bus stop. He never makes it. There's no scream, no witness, no dropped hat, no struggle. Just a boy walking into the morning rush of one of the busiest cities on earth, and then nothing. He doesn't just vanish from his neighborhood. He vanishes from existence. And in doing so, this little boy ends an entire era of American childhood. This is the disappearance of Eaton Pats. Let me set the scene for you. Soho, New York City, May 25th, 1979. Now, if you only know Soho from today, you're picturing the wrong place entirely. Forget the Chanel boutiques, forget the $30 cocktails and the influencers taking pictures of cobblestones. In 1979, Soho was a totally different animal. It was gritty. It was industrial. It was a neighborhood of converted manufacturing lofts where artists, writers, and working-class families had moved in cheap. There were bodegas on every corner, delivery trucks rumbling down the streets, cobblestones cracked from 100 years of traffic. The morning of May 25th was overcast and gray, not the bright spring day you'd imagine, but a gloomy, slightly cool Friday with that thick, restless city hum. And here's the part that's hardest for a modern audience to wrap their heads around. In 1979, this neighborhood felt safe, not because crime didn't exist, but because that's just how America worked back then. Kids walked to school alone. Kids played in the streets until the streetlights came on. Parents didn't track their children with apps. They didn't drive them to the bus stop and wait inside an idling SUV. They opened the door and said, "Be home by dinner." That was childhood. And the Soho loft community was tight-knit. Everyone knew everyone. The bodega owner knew your kid's name. The neighbors waved from their fire escapes. It was an urban village. Now, into this village walks a little boy named Eaton Patz. Eaton was 6 years old. He had blonde hair, bright eyes, and one of those impossibly sweet faces that stuck in the cultural memory of an entire generation. That morning, he was wearing a pilot's cap, a little aviator hat, the kind that makes a 6-year-old feel like a tiny adventurer. He was carrying a small bag with toy cars in it, and he was excited. Really, really excited. Because for weeks, maybe even months, Eaton had been begging his mother, Julie, to let him walk to the school bus stop by himself, just like the big kids did. The bus stop was 2 blocks south. 2 blocks. His mother had walked him there 100 times. He knew the route, and on this particular morning, Julie finally said yes. She gave him $1. She told him he could stop and buy a soda at the bodega on the way, and she stood in the doorway of their loft at 113 Prince Street and watched her little boy walk down the front steps and head off toward the corner. She saw him cross the first street safely. She saw the back of his pilot's cap bobbing along the sidewalk, and then she went inside to get on with her day. That was the last time Julie Patz ever saw her son. Now, here's where the morning starts to come apart. The school bus was scheduled to pick the kids up at 8:20 a.m. at the corner of West Broadway and Prince Street. That's where the other kids were. That's where a family friend was actually waiting. And when the bus pulled up at 8:20, Eaton wasn't there. No one thought anything of it. Kids miss the bus sometimes. The friend at the corner just assumed Eaton was sick that day, or that his mom had decided to take him to school herself. It wasn't a red flag yet. It was just a missed bus. And so the entire day passes. Julie is at home. She has no idea anything is wrong. The school doesn't call to say Eaton is absent, because in 1979, schools didn't do that. The kids who were at the bus stop assume he stayed home. The teachers at school assume he was kept home. Everyone is operating on a separate piece of the puzzle, and nobody is checking the picture. Then, 3:15 p.m. rolls around. The school bus comes back. Eaton isn't on it. Julie panics. She calls the school, and the school tells her the words that I cannot even imagine hearing as a parent. He never came to school today. He was absent. He never got on the bus this morning. That 2-block walk between her front door and the bus stop, that tiny, ordinary 2-block walk in broad daylight on a busy Manhattan street. That's where Eaton Patz disappeared. What follows is one of the largest manhunts in the history of New York City. The NYPD floods Soho with officers. They bring in bloodhounds. They put helicopters in the air. They go door to door, loft by loft, basement by basement. They tear apart every corner of the neighborhood. Cops are crawling through alleys, climbing onto rooftops, descending into freight elevators. They search every dumpster, every storage room, every parked van. And they find absolutely nothing. No pilot's cap, no bag of toy cars, no dollar bill, no witnesses who saw a struggle, nothing. Now hold on. Let's actually think about that for a second. Let's look at the map. It's 2 blocks. 2 blocks on a Friday morning at 8 a.m. in Lower Manhattan. The streets aren't empty. This isn't some quiet country road. This is New York City during the morning commute. Delivery trucks are double parked. Bodega owners are sweeping their stoops. Other parents are walking their kids. Office workers are speed walking toward the subway. The whole sidewalk is alive. And somehow, in this window of maybe 120 seconds, a 6-year-old child evaporates. No one sees a thing. Now, this is where it gets strange. Because think about how a child abduction actually works. A stranger grabs a 6-year-old off the street. What happens? The kid screams. The kid kicks. The kid drops whatever they were holding. There's a struggle. People look up. People stop. People remember. But here's the thing. There was no scream. There was no dropped pilot cap on the sidewalk. There was no dollar bill blowing down the gutter. There was no abandoned bag of toy cars. There was nothing left behind. It was like he just stepped off the curb and walked into another dimension. The Manhattan street ate him whole. And that's the part that has haunted investigators for 47 years. The case is so impossible, in fact, that for decades it bounced between suspects. For a long, long time, the prime suspect was a guy named Jose Ramos. Ramos was a creep, a convicted predator with a dark history, and he had been dating Eaton's babysitter at the time. He fit the profile so perfectly that in 2004, a civil judge actually found him legally responsible for Eaton's death and ordered him to pay the Patz family $2.7 million. Done. Case closed, right? Except they never found Eaton. They never found a body. They never found a single piece of physical evidence tying Ramos to the boy. Just a judge's ruling based on circumstantial fit. And then, 33 years after the disappearance, in 2012, a brother-in-law turned in a man named Pedro Hernandez. Hernandez had been a teenage stock clerk in 1979 at a bodega on Itan's route. And he confessed. He said he lured Itan into the basement of that bodega with the promise of a soda. He confessed to taking the boy's life in the basement and disposing of his remains. But here's the thing. Let's look at this confession. Because something doesn't add up. Hernandez confidently told police that May 25, 1979 was a nice sunny day. Except, as we already established, it wasn't. It was gray, overcast, gloomy. Historical weather records prove it. He had told different versions of this story for years. At one point, he told a church group he'd killed a black child. Eaton was white. He claimed he dumped the body at a location that, when defense attorneys checked, was a busy operational bakery at the time. You can't just casually dump a body in front of a working bakery in 1979 Soho without anyone noticing. Oh, and Hernandez had a low IQ. He had a documented history of schizoaffective hallucinations. He was a man whose brain was, by every clinical measure, deeply unwell. So now you have to ask yourself something uncomfortable. Did Pedro Hernandez kill Eaton Patz? Or did a mentally ill man, decades later, hear about the most famous missing child case in American history and gradually convince himself he was the killer? It's a genuinely chilling question, and the courts haven't been able to answer it. He was convicted in 2017. And then, in July of 2025, a federal appeals court overturned that conviction, ruling that the judge had given the jury manifestly inaccurate instructions about how to weigh his un-Mirandized confession. He's now awaiting retrial. But even if Hernandez did do it, let's think about the logistics again. A bodega at 8 a.m. on a Friday isn't empty. It's the morning rush. Commuters are coming in to grab coffee. Construction guys are buying breakfast sandwiches. The bell on the door is dinging constantly. You're telling me a teenage stock clerk lured a child into the basement, killed him, cleaned up, hid a body, and went back upstairs to keep ringing up customers in a busy New York bodega, without a single coworker noticing anything was off, without a single customer hearing anything? That doesn't fit either. So we have two completely different theories. The creepy babysitter's boyfriend, the bodega clerk, and neither of them fully accounts for the disappearance. Neither produces a body, neither produces physical evidence, neither explains how this could happen on a busy New York street with no one seeing anything. And maybe that's the real horror of the Eaton Patz case. Not that we don't have a suspect. We have too many. The mystery isn't who could have done it. The mystery is how anyone could have done it at all. The streets were full. The neighbors were watching. The bus stop was right there. And still, somehow, a 6-year-old boy with a pilot's cap on his head ceased to exist in a 120-second window of daylight. But here's what Eaton did, even in disappearing. He changed America. His face became the first missing child ever printed on a milk carton. Think about that. The whole "Have you seen me" campaign that defined an entire generation of breakfast tables. It started with him. May 25th, the day he vanished, became National Missing Children's Day. The Patz case birthed the entire national missing children's movement. It pushed parents to write down their kids' fingerprints. It birthed parental anxiety as a default mode of American life. Suddenly, kids weren't allowed to walk to the bus stop alone. They weren't allowed to play outside until dark. They weren't allowed to disappear from their parents' eye line. A whole era of childhood ended on that gray Manhattan morning. The free-range American kid, the latchkey kid, the bike-around-town kid. All of it died with Eaton. He stepped out his front door to walk 2 blocks, and he never arrived. And in not arriving, he changed the world. 47 years later, The only thing we know for certain is that on a gray Friday morning in May 1979, in one of the most populated places on Earth, a 6-year-old boy in a pilot's cap simply ceased to exist between his front door and the corner. 2 blocks, that's all it took. An 8-year-old little girl, cheerleader, sweet face, bright eyes. She's living in a homeless shelter in the shadow of the United States Capitol, 2.5 miles from the White House. And one morning in March, she walks out of that shelter holding the hand of a 51-year-old janitor, and she vanishes. 18 full days go by before anyone in authority realizes she's missing. 18 days, not 18 minutes, not 18 hours, 18 days in the most surveilled, most powerful, most well-funded city on planet Earth. And the only adult on this planet who knew what happened to her took his own life in a public park before he could be questioned. Took the answer with him into the ground. This is the disappearance of Relisha Rudd. Let me set the scene for you. Washington, D.C., early March 2014, the nation's capital in the dead of winter. And I want you to hold 2 images in your head at the same time, because they're both true, and the gap between them is the entire story. Image 1. Marble columns, the Capitol dome lit up at night, sleek black cars with diplomatic plates, lobbyists in $1,000 suits walking past the National Mall. Power, money, influence, the most photographed city in America. Image 2. A massive, ugly old building called D.C. General. Used to be a hospital. By 2014, it had been turned into the city's largest family homeless shelter. It was supposed to be temporary, emergency housing, a stopgap. But it had been operating that way for almost 15 years. The roof leaked, the hallways smelled. There was mold. There were cockroaches. There were over 600 people, mostly women and children, packed into a facility that had been condemned by basically everyone who ever toured it. Critics called it a hellhole. Politicians made speeches about closing it down. Year after year, nothing changed. That's where Relisha Rudd was living. Relisha Tanau Rudd, 8 years old, a bright, vibrant little girl. She loved cheerleading. She liked sparkly things. She was, by every account, a sweet kid trying to be a normal kid in an environment that made being a normal kid almost impossible. She lived in that shelter with her mother, Shamika Young, and her 3 brothers. The family had been bouncing in and out of D.C. General for years. They had no real address, no stability, no protective routine, and Relisha was navigating all of it as a 3rd grader at Payne Elementary, where she'd already been falling further and further behind because of how often she was absent. Now, here's the part that breaks my brain every time. The 600-plus residents of D.C. General were largely invisible to the city around them. The political establishment, the social workers, the school system, they all knew that shelter was a humanitarian disaster. But the city had no real plan. So the place just kept operating. And inside that chaos, inside that institutional apathy, predators have room to work. Enter Khalil Tatum, 51 years old. He was a janitor at D.C. General. He cleaned the floors. He moved trash. He was around the families constantly. And critically, he was a convicted felon. He had a record. He should not have been allowed unsupervised access to children in a government-funded shelter. But somehow, he had become close, way too close, to Relisha's mother, Shamika. Tatum bought Relisha gifts. He bought her a tablet. He bought her tickets to Disney on Ice. He paid attention to her. And in an environment where her own mother was struggling under the weight of generational trauma and poverty, that attention was a weapon. He worked his way into the family. He became somebody who could just take Relisha for the night, the weekend, out to dinner, wherever. And nobody in a position of authority raised an alarm about a 51-year-old janitor regularly walking out of a government shelter with an 8-year-old girl. Let me walk you through how this ended. February 26, 2014, surveillance footage at a Holiday Inn Express on Bladensburg Road in northeast D.C. captures Relisha walking down a hotel hallway with Khalil Tatum. They have a room there, March 1, 2014. A few days later. Different hotel, the Days Inn on New York Avenue. Surveillance again captures Relisha and Tatum together, walking toward a room. That's it. That's the last confirmed visual of Relisha Rudd alive. March 1st, 2014, a hotel hallway in Northeast DC. The next day, March 2nd, Tatum is seen on his own, and what's he doing? He's buying supplies. Specifically, he buys a shovel, he buys lime, and he buys 42-gallon trash bags. I want you to sit with that combination for a second. A shovel, lime, and large, heavy-duty trash bags. There's exactly one use case for those three items together. Exactly one. And it isn't gardening. Now, this is where it gets strange, and by strange, I mean the system failure becomes almost incomprehensible. Because while Tatum is buying body disposal supplies, Relisha is not at school. She's just not there. She's a third grader. Schools are legally obligated to track this stuff, and initially, the school did. They asked, and here's where it goes off the rails. Relisha's mother claimed her daughter was sick, stomach bug, doctor's note coming. And to back up that lie, she let Tatum, the 51-year-old janitor, get on the phone, pretend to be a physician, and call himself Dr. Tatum. He provided fake medical excuses for the absences. The school accepted them. Hold on, let's actually think about that. A homeless shelter janitor is calling an elementary school, pretending to be a doctor, excusing the prolonged absence of an 8-year-old he's been seen taking to hotels. And the school, the social workers, the system accepts those excuses without a single home visit, without a single follow-up, without saying, you know what? We'd actually like to see Relisha in person just to be sure she's okay. How does that happen? How does every safety net fail simultaneously for almost 3 weeks? But it gets worse. Because Shamika Young, Relisha's own mother, was actively participating in this cover-up. She didn't just look the other way. She lied. She lied to the school. She lied to the social workers. She gave them false information about when she had last seen her own daughter. Even when Relisha was already gone, even when somebody, anybody, raising a red flag could have triggered a search before the trail went cold. She kept the deception running. And so the days pile up. March 3rd, March 5th, March 10th. Relisha is gone. Tatum is moving freely around DC. The school is satisfied with fake doctor's notes. The shelter staff aren't asking. The social workers haven't visited. It isn't until March 13th, almost 2 weeks after that last hotel footage, that a school counselor finally puts the pieces together and contacts DC Child and Family Services. And even then, things move slowly. A social worker tries to arrange a meeting with Dr. Tatum on March 19th. Tatum agrees, then never shows up. Finally, somebody at the agency figures out that Dr. Tatum doesn't exist, that Khalil Tatum is a janitor, a felon, and that Relisha hasn't been seen in 18 days. The Amber Alert goes out. The DC Metropolitan Police Department launches a massive investigation. Helicopters, search teams, the FBI gets involved, and immediately the trail leads to Khalil Tatum. They go looking for him. And what they find is a horror show. March 20th. Tatum's wife, Andrea Tatum, is found dead in a motel room across the river in Prince George's County, Maryland. She had been fatally shot. Tatum had taken her there, killed her, and gone on the run. Investigators believe he did it because she had figured out what he was doing with Relisha. He needed her silenced, so he silenced her. Then comes a massive manhunt. Police are looking everywhere for Tatum. He's the only person in the world who can tell them where Relisha is. He's the only person who can bring her home. They need him alive. March 31st, Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens on the east side of DC. A maintenance worker discovers a body in a shed inside the park. It's Khalil Tatum. He ended his own life. He's been dead for several days. The only adult on earth who knew what had happened to Relisha Rudd took his own life before authorities could reach him. Now, let's talk about that park. Because this is the part that has haunted investigators for over a decade. The FBI essentially tore Kenilworth Park apart. They knew Tatum had spent time there. They knew he'd bought a shovel, lime, and trash bags. They drained ponds. They sent in cadaver dogs. They grid-searched every square foot. They dug in suspicious areas. They worked that park for weeks. And they found nothing. Not a piece of clothing, not a hair tie, not a sneaker, not a single bone, nothing. So what do we actually have? We have a man who bought disposal supplies the day after his last sighting with the child. We have a man who killed his own wife to prevent her from talking. We have a man who killed himself rather than face questioning. The behavior of a guilty man. The behavior of a man hiding the worst possible outcome. But we don't have Relisha. We don't have a grave. We don't have a definitive answer. The official D.C. Metropolitan Police conclusion is that Khalil Tatum assaulted and murdered Relisha, killed his wife to contain the secret, and then took his own life when the net closed in. That's almost certainly what happened. The behavioral evidence is overwhelming. But there's another theory the public has chewed on for years, and it comes back to Shamika Young and the bizarre, evasive behavior of Relisha's mother and stepfather. Some people, including some armchair investigators, have speculated that Relisha wasn't just taken, that she was handed over, sold, trafficked into a wider network in exchange for money, drugs, or relief from the crushing poverty the family was drowning in. D.C. detectives have publicly stated they investigated the organized human trafficking angle and ultimately ruled it out. They didn't find evidence to support it. But the mother's behavior, the lies, the active cover-up, the cooperation with Tatum has never been adequately explained. And there's been an unverified librarian sighting of a child resembling Relisha in 2015, a year after she vanished, that nobody has been able to confirm or rule out. So which is it? Is Relisha buried in some forgotten patch of dirt that the FBI somehow missed? Or is she alive somewhere, a grown teenager now with no memory of who she once was, no name, no documentation, no way home? The honest answer is, we don't know. And the people who would know either took the secret to their graves or have spent the last 11 years refusing to give a straight answer. Here's the legacy of this case. D.C. General was finally shut down. The horrific conditions Relisha lived in were used as the political fuel to close the place. Better, smaller family shelters were built. There were policy reforms. There were promises about how unaccompanied background-checked adults would never again be allowed to interact with children in city-run facilities. There were investigations into the school system's truancy protocols. But the people who failed Relisha? Most of them just walked away. The system absorbed the embarrassment, the headlines faded. The political will to make sure another Relisha never happened drained out within a year. And Relisha herself? She would be 19 years old today. A young adult. She might be in college, she might have her own apartment, she might be cheerleading still, she might be doing all the ordinary things that an 8-year-old girl dreams about doing when she grows up. But she's gone. She vanished from a shelter in the shadow of the Capitol building. She vanished while every safety net in the most powerful city on earth simultaneously failed her. And the only person who knew exactly what happened ended his own life on March 31st, 2014, in a quiet park on the wrong side of town. 18 days went by before anyone with authority looked up from their paperwork and noticed she was missing. 18 days. That's how long it took to lose her. That's how long it took for a little girl with a love for cheerleading to disappear from the country that wrote the laws meant to protect her. A 6'4" teenager, bright blue eyes, distinctive black Nike sneakers with bright blue soles. He walks out his front door on a Tuesday morning to catch the school bus. He leaves behind his phone, his laptop, his wallet, every single dollar he has in the world, and tucked deep inside that abandoned wallet, hidden where no one would find it for 6 days, is a folded note with 2 haunting words. I'm done. And then he walks into the morning sun of southern Utah, into a city surrounded by hundreds of square miles of brutal red rock desert, and he simply ceases to exist. No body, no footprint, no CCTV hit, not a single thread of clothing in 11 years. He didn't run away, he didn't wander off. He stepped out of reality. This is the disappearance of Mackin Smith. Let me set the scene for you. St. George, Utah, September 1st, 2015. Now, if you've never been to southern Utah, you need to understand the geography here, because the geography is the case. St. George is one of those rapidly growing American suburbs, cul-de-sacs, strip malls, big chain restaurants, houses with tile roofs and xeriscaped lawns. From inside the neighborhood, it looks like any other modern subdivision in the American Southwest. Quiet, safe, normal. But step 100 yards in any direction and the landscape turns absolutely savage. Towering red sandstone cliffs, dry washes, endless scrubland, temperatures that can swing from cold and pitch black at 5 a.m. to dangerous, dehydrating 100-degree heat by mid-afternoon. There's no water, there's no shade, there's no shelter. The desert that surrounds St. George does not forgive mistakes. It does not let people wander through it casually. And it absolutely will not hide a 6'4" teenager from helicopters and cadaver dogs for over a decade, unless something else is going on. Now, into this perfectly suburban-looking street walks our victim, Macon Smith, 17 years old, 6 feet 4 inches tall, around 200 pounds, blonde hair, blue eyes, striking, distinctive-looking, the kind of kid you'd notice in a Walmart parking lot from 100 feet away. And here's the part of his profile that matters most. Macon had a slight speech impediment from a childhood developmental delay. He'd been bullied for it brutally over the years. He was deeply introverted, heavily anxious in social settings. He hated being looked at. His family had relocated from Canada to Utah only a few months earlier, in April of 2015. The move was meant to help him. Both Macon and his mother, Tracy, struggled with depression, and the family thought the sunshine and warmth of southern Utah might lift their mood. But for a kid like Macon, who already struggled to connect, being yanked out of his Canadian school system in the middle of his teenage years and dropped into a brand new state, a brand new culture, a brand new social hierarchy, that was a disaster. He retreated. He gamed on his Xbox for hours. He watched anime. He buried himself in digital worlds where he didn't have to talk to anyone, where his speech impediment didn't exist, where he could be anybody he wanted to be. That was his sanctuary. That was how he survived. And here's the part of the setup that becomes critically important. The night before he vanished, his father took that sanctuary away. September 1st, 2015, 1:30 in the morning. Macon's dad, Darren, wakes up and sees a blue light glowing under his son's door. He walks in. He catches Macon staying up late watching anime on his laptop. And he does what a lot of dads would do in that moment. He punishes him. He unplugs the internet router. He takes Macon's laptop, his phone, and his charger. He walks all of it back into the master bedroom. End of conversation. Go to sleep. Now, think about that for a second, because for a normal teenager, that's an annoying punishment. You roll your eyes, you sulk, you get your phone back in a day or two. But for Macon, the kid who lived inside his electronics, the kid whose entire psychological coping system ran through that screen, this wasn't an inconvenience. This was an emotional execution. Every escape route, every numbing mechanism, every connection to the outside world, gone in a single moment at 1:30 in the morning. A few hours later, around 7 a.m., Darren checks on Macon and sees him up, moving around, getting ready for school like a normal Tuesday. Both parents hear him in the kitchen. They hear the garage door open. They hear it close. They assume he's done what he does every day. He's walked the 2 minutes down the street to the school bus stop. Darren goes off to work. Tracy goes back to sleep. The bus pulls up at 7:41 a.m. Macon is not on it, and that's the moment, although nobody knows it yet, that this kid stepped out of his life forever. Fast forward to the afternoon. Tracy gets an automated email from the school. Macon was absent. All day. She doesn't panic immediately. She drives home. She walks into Macon's room. And here's where it starts to feel deeply, deeply wrong. The bedroom door is locked, which is strange. Macon doesn't lock his door. She gets it open. She looks around. His backpack is gone. His school binders... Wait, no, his school binders are still there. They're stuffed under a pile of clothes on the floor of his closet. Hidden. Deliberately hidden in a way that would make it look, at a glance, like he'd taken them with him. His wallet is on the dresser, his ID, his cash, his phone, all sitting there, untouched. That night, after frantically checking with his youth group at church, the family officially reports him missing. The St. George Police Department starts the search, tracking dogs, helicopters, drones, search and rescue teams combing the desert, volunteers from every corner of the community pouring into the canyon surrounding the city. And they find absolutely nothing. Now, hold on. Let's actually think about what we're looking at here. If you're a 17-year-old in 2015 and you decide to run away from home, what is the very first thing you pack? What is the absolute non-negotiable item that you cannot leave behind under any circumstances? Your phone. In 2015, a teenage runaway without a phone is a teenager who's walked into the void. No way to contact friends, no way to access social media, no way to navigate, no way to call for help, no way to find a couch to crash on, no way to even know what time it is. Mackin left his phone. Okay, fine. But he must have taken money, right? Cash, a debit card, something? No. His wallet was sitting on the dresser. Every dollar he owned in the world, left behind. But here's the thing. The school binders. That's the detail that stops me cold every time. He pulled his school binders out of his backpack and hid them in his closet. He did that on purpose. He did that because if his parents glanced in his room that morning, they were supposed to see an open, semi-empty backpack and assume he'd taken his school stuff with him. He was buying himself time. He was creating the illusion of a normal school day. He wanted hours of head start before anyone realized something was wrong. And that level of planning, that level of premeditation, doesn't fit the impulsive runaway story. That doesn't fit the "I had a bad night, I'm just walking around to cool off" story. That fits someone who decided, sometime between 1:30 a.m. and 7:30 a.m., that he was not coming back. And then there's the note. 6 days after Macon disappeared, his mother's going through his things, trying to piece together her son's last moments. She picks up his wallet, the one that's been sitting on the dresser, and she finds a folded piece of paper tucked deep inside. A handwritten note. The full contents have never been released publicly to protect his privacy, but the family confirmed that the phrase in there was, "I'm done." Now, this is where it gets strange, because if you want your parents to find a goodbye note, you don't fold it up and hide it inside your wallet. You leave it on your pillow, you leave it on the kitchen counter, you tape it to the fridge. The whole point of a goodbye note is that it's found. It's a final message. It's a communication. This wasn't a communication. This was hidden. It almost reads like a private journal entry, something he wrote for himself in a moment of despair that he never intended his mother to see. Or, depending on which theory you believe, something he never had a chance to take with him. Either way, the standard runaway narrative starts to break down completely. But let's keep going. Let's talk about the geography. Because this is the part of the case that really refuses to make sense. If Macon walked out into that desert that morning, alone, without water, without supplies, just in his school clothes and those distinctive Nike sneakers, he should have been found. The St. George Police Department, along with Red Rock Search and Rescue, ran one of the most exhaustive search operations in southern Utah history. 17 separate organized professional searches, cadaver dogs, drones with thermal imaging, aerial sweeps with helicopters, volunteers combing grid sectors for years. You have a 6'4" young man, blonde hair, bright blue eyes, wearing identifiable shoes with bright blue soles. Even his skeleton, if he'd died of exposure, would be enormous. It would not be hidden by a desert shrub. It would not be missed by trained dogs and thermal scanners. And yet, 11 years later, not a footprint, not a thread of clothing, not a Nike sneaker, not a piece of jewelry, not a bone, not a single shred of physical evidence that Macon Smith ever walked into the wilderness. How does that happen? How does a kid that big, that visible, just dissolve into the landscape? There are really only a few ways to explain it, and none of them are satisfying. Some people believe he walked out of the neighborhood and was picked up by a stranger, maybe somebody he'd been talking to online before his electronics were taken. The neighbor who reported seeing a kid matching his description walking on the sidewalk at 3:15 p.m. that afternoon, hours after he supposedly vanished, adds weight to this. If he was being driven somewhere, the desert search was pointless from day one. He was already 100 miles away. Others believe a much darker theory. Unsealed search warrants later revealed that the St. George Police, at one point, actively investigated the possibility that McKinn had been harmed at home, that the morning garage door noises were staged, that the hidden binders and the wallet note were a cover-up. There was documented friction in that household. There was the late-night confiscation of the electronics. There was the strange detail of Darren allegedly not joining the early ground searches, though he later said he was specifically told not to, so he wouldn't be the one to find his son's body. The parents reportedly passed polygraphs. They later divorced in 2018. They both maintain their complete innocence, and there has never been a single piece of physical evidence linking either of them to a crime. And then there's the simplest, most tragic theory of all, that Makian, devastated by the loss of his digital lifeline, walked out into that desert at 7:30 in the morning with the full intention of disappearing. That he found a way to vanish so completely that even the people trained to find the missing could never find him. That somewhere, in some crevice, in some forgotten canyon, his story ended. But even that theory has to answer the same impossible question. Where is he? For Tracy Smith, his mother, there's no resolution. There's no funeral. There's no closure. Just a phone that hasn't been picked up in 11 years. A wallet that still has his ID in it. A note that says, "I'm done." And a quiet bedroom that's been frozen in time since September 1st, 2015. There have been sightings, of course, unconfirmed reports from across the country over the years. People who think they saw a tall, blonde young man in some gas station, some bus terminal, some shelter. None of them have ever panned out. None of them have ever brought him home. He walked out of his front door on an ordinary Tuesday morning. He was supposed to walk 2 minutes to a school bus stop. He never got on the bus. He never went to school. He just stepped out of the world. And 11 years later, the Utah desert still hasn't given him back. An 18-year-old girl, the smartest in her class, full scholarship to pre-med, photogenic smile, the kind of kid every parent dreams of raising. She steps off the curb outside a nightclub at 1:30 in the morning on a Caribbean island, gets into a silver Honda Civic with 3 young men she just met, and is never seen alive again. Her packed suitcase is sitting in her hotel room. Her passport is on the dresser. Her flight home is hours away. And what follows is a 20-year nightmare of shifting lies, taunting confessions, and a perpetrator so brazen that he commits an almost identical murder, 5 years to the day on the other side of the world. This is the disappearance of Natalie Holloway. Let me set the scene for you. Oranjestad, Aruba. The morning hours of May 30th, 2005. Now, if you've never been to Aruba, picture this. Warm Caribbean breezes blowing in off the ocean. Turquoise water so bright it almost hurts your eyes. White sand beaches lined with palm trees. The island is tiny, only about 20 miles long, and the entire economy is built around tourism. It's safe. It's friendly. It's the kind of place where American parents feel okay letting their teenagers go for a senior trip. Because, what could possibly go wrong in paradise? And on this particular week, the island was overflowing with American high school graduates, Mountain Brook High School, Alabama, a graduating class hitting the beach for one last hurrah before college, before adulthood, before the rest of their lives. The vibe was that classic intoxicating feeling of being 18 and free for the first time, sun-drunk during the day, bar hopping at night, that delusional teenage invincibility where you genuinely believe nothing bad can ever happen to you, because nothing bad ever has. In the middle of all of this is Natalie Holloway. Natalie was 18 years old, honor student, straight A's. She had just locked in a full scholarship to pre-med studies. She wasn't the wild one of the group. She wasn't the reckless one. She wasn't the type to disappear on a whim or run off with a stranger. She was the kid every mother in Mountain Brook held up as an example. Bright, driven, polished. The whole world was set up perfectly in front of her, just waiting. And on May 29th, 2005, her last night in Aruba, she went out with her classmates to a place called Carlos and Charlie's. Now, Carlos and Charlie's was the spot. If you were a tourist in Oranjestad in 2005, you were going to end up there. Neon lights, tequila shots, music thumping so loud you had to scream into someone's ear to be heard. The legal drinking age in Aruba was 18, which made it the perfect playground for American kids who couldn't legally drink back home. And by all accounts, Natalie was having fun, dancing, laughing, living. And then, around 1:30 a.m., the bar closes. The lights come up. Time to go home. The Mountain Brook group is loading onto a chaperoned bus to head back to the Holiday Inn. But Natalie doesn't get on the bus. Instead, she walks out to the parking lot, and witnesses see her climbing into a silver Honda Civic with 3 local guys. 3 guys she'd been hanging out with at the bar that night. A 17-year-old Dutch national named Joran van der Sloot and 2 Surinamese brothers Deepak and Satish Kalpo. That car pulls out of the parking lot, and Natalie Holloway vanishes off the face of the earth. The next morning, the Mountain Brook group is gathering in the hotel lobby. They've got a flight back to Alabama to catch. They're checking luggage, doing the head count, and somebody realizes Natalie isn't there. They go up to her room. The door's locked. They get it open. And what they see is the first sign that something is very, very wrong. Her suitcase is packed. Like, fully packed, ready to go. Her passport is sitting right there on the dresser. Her clothes are folded. Her toiletries are zipped up. Every single thing an 18-year-old needs to get on an international flight is sitting in that room, waiting for her. Except her. Now think about that for a second, because this is one of those details that gets lost in the noise of a 20-year media circus. If Natalie had decided to skip the flight, if she'd decided to extend her trip, if she'd decided to run off with a guy she'd met at the bar, what's the one thing she'd absolutely need? Her passport. You can't go anywhere without your passport. You can't even check into another hotel. And it's sitting right there, untouched. This isn't a young woman who made a choice to disappear. This is a young woman who fully intended to come back to that room, but she never did. And so begins one of the most infuriating, most public, most exhausting missing persons investigations in modern history. Within hours, her mother, Beth Holloway, is on a plane to Aruba. The local police get involved. The FBI sends agents. Eventually, Dutch military teams, volunteer search groups, helicopters, dive teams, dogs. They tear apart the island. They drain ponds. They dig up yards. They search caves. They search beaches. And they find nothing. Now, here's where the case starts to bend reality. Because the 3 guys in that Honda Civic, they're sitting right there. They get pulled in for questioning almost immediately. And from the very first interview, the story starts to shift. Joran van der Sloot, this 17-year-old kid, the privileged son of an Aruban judge in training, tells police something very specific. He says they dropped Natalie off at her Holiday Inn, right at the front entrance, saw her walk inside, done. End of story. But here's the thing. The Holiday Inn has security cameras, multiple angles, covering every entrance to the lobby. Police pull the footage from that entire night, every minute, and Natalie Holloway never walks through those doors, not once. So you have to ask the obvious question. If they dropped her off at the hotel, where did she go? She didn't enter the lobby. She didn't enter through a side door. She wasn't seen by any staff. There is no footage, no witness, no record of her arriving at that hotel. The story is a lie, and it falls apart in about 12 hours. So when the camera evidence makes the first story impossible, the boys change the story. Now, this is where it gets strange. Joran tells police actually, no, we didn't drop her at the hotel. We dropped her off at the beach, the remote California Lighthouse Beach, way up at the northern tip of the island. He says he and Natalie got dropped off there, walked along the sand for a while, and then she asked to stay on the beach by herself. So he, being a gentleman, just left her there at 2 a.m. on a dark beach, alone, and walked home. Hold on, let's actually think about that. An 18-year-old American girl on the last night of her senior trip with an international flight scheduled for the next morning, with her suitcase packed and her passport sitting back in her hotel room, asks to be left alone on a pitch-black isolated Caribbean beach at 2 a.m. by a guy she just met. So she can do what exactly? Stargaze? Reflect on her future? Wait for the sunrise 5 hours later? And the 17-year-old guy who's been hanging out with her all night just shrugs and walks home? It defies every single piece of human logic. It defies how teenage girls behave. It defies how teenage boys behave. It defies basic safety. It defies the simple fact that she had a plane to catch. There is no version of this story that holds up if you spend more than 30 seconds with it. And the police know it. The Calpo brothers and Duran get arrested, they get released, they get arrested again, they get released again. Years go by. Aruban authorities keep saying the same thing. We can't prosecute without a body, without physical evidence. And there is no body, there is no physical evidence. So this trio of suspects just walks, free, living their lives, while Beth Holloway tears the world apart looking for her daughter. And let's talk about the island for a minute, because this is the part that really doesn't make sense. Aruba is 20 miles long. You can drive across the entire country in under an hour. This isn't a missing person case in the Amazon. This isn't someone vanishing in the Alaskan wilderness. This is one of the smallest, most heavily searched landmasses on Earth. FBI agents, Dutch Marines, Aruban police, dive teams in the harbor, cadaver dogs in the dunes, hundreds of volunteers, and not one shred of evidence ever surfaces. How? How is that possible on an island that small? Unless someone with intimate knowledge of the island, with influence and resources, made sure she would never be found. Now, here's where the story takes its darkest turn. Because Duran van der Sloot doesn't just stay quiet and disappear. He starts giving interviews. He starts taunting the media. He gets caught on hidden cameras telling a Dutch reporter that, yes, he was on the beach. Yes, Natalie had a seizure. Yes, he panicked and called a friend who took her body away on a boat. Then he recants. Then he tells a different story. Then he claims he trafficked her into an illicit network. Then he says he buried her in gravel under a new house. Every few years, a new version, a new lie, a new way of toying with this grieving mother. And then, in 2010, he hits an unimaginable new low. He contacts Beth Holloway directly. He offers to tell her exactly where Natalie's body is for $250,000. She wires him a partial payment to try to get the truth. He takes the money, gives her a fake location, and immediately flees to Peru. And this is the part that still gives me chills. 5 years exactly to the day after Natalie Holloway disappeared, May 30th, 2010. Duran van der Sloot picks up a 21-year-old Peruvian business student named Stephanie Flores in a Lima hotel, and he beats her to death in his hotel room the exact same day. 5 years apart. That's not a coincidence, that's a signature. He gets convicted in Peru. He gets sentenced to 28 years, and eventually, in 2023, he gets extradited to the United States to face the extortion charges in Alabama. And as part of a plea deal, 18 years after Natalie disappeared, he finally tells the truth, or what he claims is the truth, anyway. He says he and Natalie were on the beach. They started fooling around. She told him no. She kneed him in the crotch to make him stop, and he snapped. He struck her, causing her to lose consciousness. In his own taped words, he confessed to using a cinder block found on the beach to end her life. And then, knowing the entire island was about to be searched, knowing every inch of land was about to be turned over, he dragged her body into the ocean, waded out up to his knees, and pushed her out into the dark Caribbean current, where the tides carried her away forever. That's why they never found her. They were looking on the wrong element. She wasn't in the sand. She wasn't in a yard. She wasn't under a house. She was in the water. And that's the case. 20 years, a taunting killer, a grieving family, an island that swallowed a girl whole, a teenager who came to a tropical paradise to celebrate her future, who packed her suitcase, who set her passport on the dresser, who got into the wrong car on the wrong night. She was going to be a doctor. She vanished into the Caribbean night. And the only person who knew where she really went used that knowledge as a weapon for almost 2 decades. An 18-year-old girl, brand new to California, Park Scholarship student, industrial design major, the kind of kid who works 2 jobs at once because she just doesn't know how to sit still. She clocks out of her barista shift at 3 p.m. on a summer Monday in downtown San Francisco. She mentions to her coworkers that she's thinking about going to the beach. She withdraws a little cash from an ATM. She leaves a $400 paycheck sitting at the coffee shop, completely unclaimed. And somewhere between the polished marble floors of a downtown shopping mall and the foggy cliffs of the Pacific Ocean, she steps out of her own life and never comes back. 29 years later, The last people who saw her have never been identified. Her body has never been found. And the most chilling forensic evidence in the case wasn't discovered until 2 decades after she vanished, and it points to a place nobody was looking. This is the disappearance of Kristen Modafferi. Let me set the scene for you. San Francisco, June 23rd, 1997. Now, if you've ever been to San Francisco in June, you know it's nothing like what people imagine California to be. There's no sunshine. There's no beach weather. Mark Twain famously said the coldest winter he ever spent was a summer in San Francisco, and he wasn't kidding. June afternoons in the city are cool, gray, and dominated by that thick marine fog that rolls in off the Pacific. It blankets the hills, it muffles the sound, it turns the whole city into something a little surreal and a little eerie, even on a bright workday. Downtown San Francisco in 1997 was bustling. The dot-com boom was just starting to take off. The financial district was packed with suits during the day, with restaurants and cafes humming through the lunch rush. The Crocker Galleria, a high-end 3-story shopping mall right in the middle of all of that, was as safe and sanitized as any commercial space gets. Marble floors, skylight roof, polished storefronts, espresso machines hissing, office workers grabbing lunch. It is the absolute opposite of a dangerous environment. But just a few miles west of all that polished commerce, San Francisco bends into something completely different. Land's End, the Sutro Baths ruins, Baker Beach. These are the wild, foggy, rugged Pacific cliffs at the western edge of the city. Beautiful, breathtaking, but also genuinely dangerous in spots. Sheer drops, heavy surf, rip currents, trails that wind right up to the edge of nothing. Visibility that can collapse to 20 feet in seconds when the fog rolls in. That contrast, the polished downtown safety on one end and the foggy, unforgiving coastal cliffs on the other, is the entire spatial canvas of this case. In the middle of all of this is our victim, Kristen Deborah Modafferi, 18 years old, just turned 18 actually, a few weeks earlier. A rising sophomore at North Carolina State University on a prestigious Park Scholarship studying industrial design. By every metric you'd want to measure, she was the kind of kid you'd want as your daughter, your sister, your friend. Driven, hardworking, ambitious, optimistic. She'd flown across the country to spend the summer in the Bay Area. She had it all planned out. She enrolled in a summer photography course at UC Berkeley, prepaid $925 in tuition. She found a room in a house in Oakland on Jane Avenue, sharing the place with 4 male roommates. She picked up not 1, but 2 jobs to support herself, one at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art and a full-time barista gig at Spinelli's Coffee inside the Crocker Galleria. This was not a kid who was drifting. This was a kid who had built a whole summer life from scratch in a city she'd barely known 3 weeks earlier. Let me walk you through that Monday afternoon, because every minute of it matters. 3 p.m. Kristen clocks out of her shift at Spinelli's. She's tired, she's done. She mentions to her coworkers that there's supposedly going to be a party at Baker Beach that evening, and she's thinking about heading out there. She asks them for directions. How do you get to Land's End? How do you get to Baker Beach? Coworkers point her in the right direction. 3:45 p.m. 45 minutes after clocking out, Kristen is still inside the mall. She's spotted by her own coworkers, this time on the second floor of the Galleria, engaged in a conversation with a woman they don't recognize, a blonde woman. They're talking. They appear to be together. Around the same time, Kristen visits a Wells Fargo ATM and withdraws a small amount of cash. And here's the strange detail. She leaves her $400 paycheck behind, sitting at Spinelli's. She doesn't pick it up. She doesn't cash it. She just leaves it there. Sometime after that, Kristen leaves the mall. She's possibly with the blonde woman, possibly alone. We don't really know. The trail goes cold. That night, she doesn't come home to the Oakland apartment. Her 4 male roommates notice she isn't there. They don't do anything about it. They figure she's out with friends, maybe sleeping somewhere else. No big deal. The next morning, June 24th, is the first day of her photography class at UC Berkeley, the class she crossed the country for, the class she paid almost $1,000 for. She doesn't show up. And here's where everything starts to fall apart. Because the roommates still don't act. Days go by. They don't call the police. They don't call her parents. They don't search her things. They just shrug and assume the worst-case scenario is that the new girl decided to move on. It isn't until June 27th, 4 full days after she vanished, that Kristen's parents in North Carolina, alarmed because she hasn't called, finally fly across the country to San Francisco themselves and report her missing to the Oakland Police Department. 4 days. That gap is everything. By the time anyone's looking for her, the trail is cold concrete. Now hold on. Let's actually think about what we know. Let's start with the walkaway theory. Because anytime an 18-year-old vanishes in a big city, this is the first thing people speculate. Maybe she just wanted to disappear. Maybe she wanted to start fresh. Maybe California seduced her. But here's the thing. Look at what she left behind. Her ID is still in her room. Her clothes are still in her closet. Her cash is still in her bank account. Her paycheck is still sitting uncollected at Spinelli's. She had just prepaid $925 for a photography class she was excited about. She was registered for her sophomore year at NC State on a major scholarship. She'd just rebuilt her entire life for the summer in a brand new city. You don't abandon a life you just spent months building. You don't walk away from a paycheck you earned yesterday. You don't ditch a class you crossed the country to attend. The walkaway theory falls apart on contact with her actual circumstances. Okay, so what about the cliffs? What about the beach? This is where most of the early investigation focused. Bloodhounds were brought in. They picked up Kristen's scent from the Crocker Galleria. They tracked it onto the Muni 38 Geary bus line. Eventually, the scent was traced toward Sutro Heights Park, which is right near Land's End and Baker Beach. And then it disappeared. So maybe the theory writes itself, right? She took the bus out toward the coast. She went hiking near the cliffs. She slipped. The fog was thick. The surf was high. She fell, was swept into the Pacific, and her body was carried out to sea. But let's look at the geography. Land's End and Baker Beach are not remote wilderness. They are major San Francisco tourist attractions. On any given summer afternoon, even a foggy one, those trails are crawling with hikers, tourists, locals walking their dogs, photography students, joggers. The Sutro Baths ruins alone draw thousands of visitors a year. The idea that an 18-year-old girl falls off a public cliff on a Monday afternoon in late June, in plain sight of all those people, and nobody sees a thing, nobody hears a scream, nobody finds a piece of her clothing that strains belief. Coastal accidents happen, but they almost always leave something behind. Shoes, a backpack, a jacket, some marker that someone was there. Kristen left nothing. And then there's the mystery blonde. This is the part of the case that haunts everyone. Who was the woman Kristen was speaking to on the second floor of the Crocker Galleria at 3:45 p.m.? Kristen had been in the city for 3 weeks. She didn't know anyone. She had her co-workers and her roommates, and that was it. So who was this woman? And why would Kristen be standing there having a conversation with her? Investigators eventually searched Kristen's room in Oakland. They found a discarded Bay Guardian newspaper in her trash. Inside, a personal ad was circled. It read, "Friends, females seeking friends to share activities exploring the Bay Area." The author of that ad has never been identified. Now I want you to just sit with that combination for a second. An 18-year-old new to a city, eager for friends, circles a personal ad placed by a woman looking for activity partners. Then she's seen, days later, having a conversation with an unidentified blonde woman in the very mall where she works. Then she vanishes. And no woman ever comes forward in almost 3 decades to clear her name or explain the conversation. It's not proof of anything, but it's an enormous unanswered question, and every armchair investigator who's looked at this case has wondered if that ad was a lure, either by a woman acting alone or as bait for someone else. But here's where the case takes its strangest turn. And I want to be careful with this because the science is contested, but it's real, and it's in the case file. In 2015, a renowned forensic investigator named Paul Dosty brought a specialized cadaver dog named Buster to Kristen's old residence on Jane Avenue in Oakland, the same Oakland house she shared with the 4 male roommates. The dog alerted strongly to the presence of human decomposition in the basement. In 2017, leading forensic anthropologist Dr. Arpad Vas used an advanced device designed to detect the chemical signatures of human decomposition. The device scanned around the property. It pinpointed strong chemical signatures between Kristen's old house at 274 Jane Avenue and the neighboring property next door, 278 Jane Avenue, which, at the time of her disappearance, was operating as a halfway house for convicted felons. Near a concrete slab, a chemical signature consistent with human blood was detected, and according to Dosti and Vass, DNA testing of material collected from the site matched samples provided by Kristen's parents. Hold on. Let's actually pause on that. For 20 years, every theory in this case was pointing west. The foggy cliffs, the Pacific Ocean, the tourist beaches. The narrative was that Kristen had been lured to the coast by someone, met with foul play, and her body had been lost to the sea. But the cadaver dog and the chemical scans suggest something far darker and far closer to home. That she actually made it back to Oakland that night. Maybe she came home. Maybe she was killed there. Maybe she never even left for the beach at all. Maybe the people she was supposed to be safest around in the house she'd paid rent on were the people who took her life. Or maybe the predator was next door in the halfway house, right through a shared wall. The findings have never been fully acted on by Oakland police, which has remained controversial. But the implication, if those scans are accurate, is staggering. Kristen wasn't lost to the Pacific. Kristen was hidden in a basement. The clue everyone needed wasn't a mile from the cliffs. It was 20 feet from the front door of her own apartment. So which is it? The blonde woman from the personal ad, the bus to the beach, the basement in Oakland, the halfway house next door? The case has too many viable suspects and not enough physical proof to close on any of them. And here's the legacy. Because Kristen was exactly 18 years old when she vanished, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children initially refused to assist her family. Their charter only covered minors. There was no equivalent national organization for missing adults. None. The Modafferi family had to lobby Congress directly. In 2000, President Bill Clinton signed Kristen's Law into existence, which established the National Center for Missing Adults. That law exists because Kristen Modafferi's parents couldn't get federal help finding their own daughter, and every adult missing person case in America has been impacted by that legislation since. It is a hell of a legacy. But it's not what her parents wanted. What her parents wanted was Kristen. And after almost 3 decades, they don't have her. She clocked out of a coffee shop at 3 p.m. on a foggy summer Monday. She mentioned a party at the beach. She talked to a stranger on the second floor of a downtown mall. She withdrew a little cash. She left her paycheck behind, and she stepped into the fog. And she became a ghost. A 25-year-old heiress, daughter of a perfume empire, Bryn Mawr graduate, speaks several languages, the kind of woman whose face every shopkeeper on Fifth Avenue knows by name. She walks down the most famous street in America at high noon, 2 weeks before Christmas, wrapped in furs. She buys a box of chocolates and charges it to the family account. She stops at a bookstore. She bumps into a friend on the sidewalk. They chat about an upcoming debutante party. She waves goodbye. She steps into the dense crowd of holiday shoppers heading toward Central Park. And she ceases to exist. Forever. Her father is so terrified of a public scandal that he refuses to call the police for 6 entire weeks. By the time the New York Police Department is finally allowed to look for her, the trail is colder than the Hudson in January. 115 years later, she is still gone, and she is arguably the most famous missing person in American history. This is the disappearance of Dorothy Arnold. Let me set the scene for you. New York City, December 12th, 1910. Now, you really have to picture this, because the New York of 1910 is not the New York of today, but it's also not as different as you might think. The Gilded Age is in full swing. The robber baron families, the Astors, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, they all live in massive mansions stretching up Fifth Avenue. Horse-drawn carriages share the streets with the brand new automobiles that are starting to appear. Christmas is just 2 weeks away, and the air on Fifth Avenue smells like roasted chestnuts and coal smoke. Wealthy women are wrapped in furs and walking in and out of department stores. Brentano's, Park and Tilford, Tiffany's. It's the absolute epicenter of American wealth, fashion, and visibility. And here's the thing about Fifth Avenue in 1910. Society was small. The upper crust all knew each other. They went to the same balls. They sent their kids to the same finishing schools. They shopped at the same dozen stores. When a wealthy young woman walked down Fifth Avenue, she wasn't anonymous the way you are walking down a city street today. She was recognized by doormen, by shopkeepers, by the carriage drivers waiting outside the storefronts. There was no such thing as anonymity for someone like Dorothy Arnold, which is what makes the next part of this story almost impossible. In the middle of all of this is our victim, Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold, 25 years old, heiress to the F.R. Arnold and Company perfume empire. Her uncle, on her mother's side, sat on the Supreme Court. Her father, Francis Arnold, was a powerful and obsessively image-conscious man who ran the family business and the family household with a closed fist. They lived in a mansion on 79th Street, just steps from Central Park. By every external measure, Dorothy Arnold had won the lottery of life. But internally, Dorothy was suffocating. She was a Bryn Mawr graduate. She was fluent in multiple languages. She was educated, ambitious, intellectually restless, and she desperately wanted to be a published writer. She'd written short stories. She'd submitted them to McClure's, one of the top literary magazines in America, and McClure's had rejected her repeatedly. One specific story she'd submitted, called The Poinsettia Flames, was rejected, and the rejection devastated her. Her family, instead of supporting her, mocked her ambitions. Her father viewed writing as something beneath their station. Her mother dismissed her dreams. They wanted Dorothy to be a society wife, to marry well, to stay decorative. And there was one more thing. Dorothy had a secret. She was in a clandestine romantic relationship with a 40-year-old engineer named George Griscom Jr. Her father couldn't stand him, considered him entirely unsuitable. So Dorothy hid the relationship. Secretly, she maintained a private P.O. box for correspondence. In September of 1910, 3 months before her disappearance, she had lied to her parents and told them she was visiting a friend in Boston. She'd actually pawned $500 worth of her own jewelry and used the money to spend a week alone with Griscom at a hotel. So underneath the heiress portrait, you have a frustrated writer, a controlled daughter, a secret lover, a private mailbox, and a young woman who was clearly capable of pulling off small acts of rebellion right under her parents' noses. Now, let me walk you through December 12th, because every minute of it matters. 11 a.m. Dorothy leaves her family's 79th Street mansion. She tells her mother she's going down to Fifth Avenue to shop for an evening gown for her younger sister's upcoming debutante coming-out party. Her mother offers to come with her. Dorothy declines, says she'd rather go alone. Her mother thinks nothing of it. Dorothy has about $30 in cash on her, which in 1910 was a meaningful amount, roughly equivalent to about $1,000 today. Around noon, Dorothy walks into Park and Tilford, a fancy provision store at 59th and 5th. She buys a half-pound box of chocolates. She doesn't pay cash. She charges it to the family's standing account casually, the way you'd swipe a credit card. Clerks who knew her describe her as cheerful and entirely normal. Then she walks south. A long walk, actually. About 32 blocks. Down to Brentano's bookstore at 27th and 5th. She picks out a book, a specific book, a volume called Engaged Girl Sketches by Emily Calvin Blake. She pays cash. Again, the clerks remember her. Pleasant, polite, no sign of distress, just before 2 p.m. She steps back out onto the sidewalk in front of Brentano's, and by sheer chance, she bumps into a friend, a young woman named Gladys King. Dorothy is twirling her muff, the little fur hand warmer fashionable women carried back then. She's smiling. She mentions she's planning to walk home through Central Park just for the pleasure of a winter stroll. They chat for a moment about the upcoming debutante party. Then, Dorothy excuses herself. Gladys King watches Dorothy turn, watches her wave goodbye, watches her step away into the dense holiday crowd flowing up Fifth Avenue. And that's it. That is the last verified human sighting of Dorothy Arnold in broad daylight at 2 p.m. on the most famous street in America, in front of one of the most famous bookstores in the city, with a friend literally watching her walk away. She never makes it home for dinner. Now, hold on. Let's actually think about what we're looking at here. This is what wakes me up about this case. Look at the geography. 5th Avenue and 27th Street at 2 p.m. on a Monday in December. This isn't a back alley. This isn't a dark forest. This isn't a remote anything. This is one of the busiest, most surveilled streets in the social sense on planet Earth at that moment. People are everywhere. Shopkeepers know her. Friends might recognize her at any moment. Horse-drawn cabs are lined up looking for fares. Pedestrians are flowing in every direction. How does a recognizable heiress in furs in broad daylight get abducted on that street without a single witness, anywhere, ever reporting a struggle, a scream, a strange carriage, a man grabbing her arm? How? It is physically almost impossible, unless she walked off 5th Avenue voluntarily, or unless she was met by someone she trusted. Which brings us to the question, what happened next? Now, this is where it gets strange, because as the hours tick by that evening, Dorothy doesn't come home. She misses dinner. Her mother starts making quiet phone calls, inquiries. Where is Dorothy? Has anyone seen her? Hours turn into a long, sleepless night. And the next morning, the Arnold family does the most insane thing I've ever read about in a missing persons case. They don't call the police. Let me say that again. The Arnolds don't call the police. Not that day, not that week, not that month. They sit on the disappearance of their own daughter for 6 full weeks before the New York Police Department is officially notified. 6 weeks. Why? Because Francis Arnold, the patriarch, is more afraid of social scandal than of losing his own daughter. He is haunted by a famous society incident from 1909 where another wealthy woman, Adele Boas, had run off and embarrassed her family in the papers. Francis Arnold cannot stomach the thought of the Arnold name being splashed across the gossip columns. So instead, he hires the family lawyer, John S. Keith. He hires private Pinkerton detectives. He has them quietly check hospitals. He has them scour shipping manifests for transatlantic liners, just in case Dorothy ran off to Europe. He keeps the whole thing inside the family. And meanwhile, every hour that passes destroys the timeline. Witnesses forget. Evidence disappears. A trail that might have been hot if checked on day 1 is ice cold by week 6. But here's the thing that really doesn't sit right. When the family finally calls the NYPD in late January 1911, 6 weeks after she vanished, Francis Arnold gives an interview to the press. And what does he say? He says, "She is dead." No qualifier. No, "we hope she'll come home." No, "we think she might be missing." She is dead. Stated as fact. From a father who has no body, no ransom note, no evidence, no last seen, nothing. Just his absolute certainty that his daughter is no longer alive. How does a father say that? Why is he so sure? Unless he knows something. Unless the family knew, on some level, what she was probably doing in her secret life. And they knew it was the kind of thing that could kill a young woman in 1910. Because the most chilling theory of the Dorothy Arnold case isn't a stranger abduction. It isn't a stalker. It's this. Dorothy had been secretly sleeping with George Griscom Jr. They'd spent that hotel week together in September. December is 3 months later. If she was pregnant, she would have been at the point where her clothes started to become a problem. And in 1910, an unmarried socialite getting pregnant was social annihilation. A scandal that could destroy the entire family business. The only way out, the only escape valve, was an illicit underground medical procedure. And in 1910, those were performed by untrained practitioners in backrooms in places like New Jersey. And women died. Routinely. And here's the part that adds weight to this theory. 6 years later, in April 1916, a convict named Edward Glenoris, sitting in a Rhode Island prison, came forward with a confession. He claimed he had been paid $250 in December 1910 to transport an unconscious young woman, whom he identified by Dorothy's specific signet ring, from New Rochelle to a house in Weehawken, New Jersey. He said a doctor at the house had told him the woman died due to complications from an illicit procedure. He said he had buried her body in the cellar. Glenoris later recanted under police pressure, But the details align terrifyingly well with how things worked in that era. So when Francis Arnold told reporters she is dead, maybe he wasn't speculating. Maybe he was admitting what he already knew. That his daughter, his ambitious, headstrong, secretly engaged to the wrong man daughter, had walked off Fifth Avenue on December 12th to meet someone, to fix a problem the family could never publicly acknowledge, and that the fix had killed her. Maybe the 6 weeks of silence weren't fear of scandal. Maybe they were grief, performed in secret. And then there's the other strange detail. When investigators eventually got into Dorothy's room, they found burned manuscripts in her fireplace, papers reduced to ash, the literary dreams McClure's had rejected, destroyed, by her own hand, or by someone's. There's still the runaway theory, of course, the idea that Dorothy, devastated by her father's control, by her literary rejections, by her stifling life, simply walked away, reinvented herself, lived out her life in some quiet, anonymous town. Her family's lawyer eventually publicly endorsed a suicide theory, that she'd quietly walked into Central Park and ended her own life, that a body in the reservoir simply never surfaced. But the runaway theory has the same problem we run into in every case. She left behind a closet full of beautiful clothes. She left behind family money worth millions. She left behind the secret P.O. box. She left behind her future. $30 in cash is not the bankroll of an heiress starting fresh. It's pocket money for a December shopping trip. Francis Arnold spent an estimated $250,000 searching for his daughter. That's millions in today's money. He never found her. He eventually wrote Dorothy out of his will. In 1922, he died not knowing. She bought a box of chocolates, she bought a book, she chatted with a friend, she stepped toward Central Park, and she walked into history. 115 years later, Dorothy Arnold remains the ghost of the Gilded Age. The wealthy daughter who proved that money, status, family, and pedigree, none of it could keep her from simply ceasing to exist on the most famous street in America at high noon. Whatever happened in those next few hours, whatever room she walked into, whoever met her, whoever was waiting, has stayed silent for over a century. And Fifth Avenue, where she was last seen, is still there, still bustling, still flowing with holiday shoppers every December. It just never gave her back.